Bryan Reynolds, you are a partner in Appraiser eLearning. You're the past president of the National Association of Appraisers, a former state investigator, an AQB certified USPAP instructor, a consultant, and most importantly, a boots on the ground certified general appraiser with experience in both residential and commercial appraisals. To your credit, you also help train the next generation of appraisers as a supervisory appraiser, and I know your trainees well. So I'm happy that you're participating in this conversation with me regarding adjustments. Now, I was reminded as I'm researching this topic and looking at old presentations from previous conferences, some of them that you did, and you had a session called Where Did You Get That Number? Now, this presentation, it dates back to 2018 or so, but it was one to remember if you were at the Appraisal Summit that year. You include some very simple slides to that effect. And so thank you for being with me today.
Great. Well, John, thanks for having me. And listen, anytime I can do something to support appraisers or help appraisers, at least that's what I'm attempting to do, I'm certainly all in that environment. In fact, we just did a podcast on that very topic that you just mentioned. Where'd you get your number? And during that, we show the math on the screen if you want to watch it. And my answer is, where I got my number is, I reach right down into the marketplace and pull it out of there.
Bryan, I absolutely love that analogy. So the genesis for this conversation that you and I are having today is, I think there's some misunderstandings from appraisers about the conditions that are coming back to them. Conditions coming specifically from our team here at Class Valuation. Now, to be fair, it's not necessarily coming from us or our clients. It's really coming from the secondary market, Bryan. It's the investors that include the GSEs, FHA, VA, etc. So the reality is, readers of our reports are far more sophisticated today, Bryan, in understanding and reading all of the data that's in front of them. So the question that comes to the appraiser is, how did you derive those adjustments, and what support do you have for those adjustments? Now, fast forward, we invited you to have this conversation, hoping to provide some additional assistance in understanding the request and how to effectively respond to the clients. Now, as an appraiser, I'm sure you're confronted with the same question, at least some of the time, maybe not all of the time. I don't want to make any assumptions here. But as an investigator or a consultant, you may actually be navigating the same issues in a state board complaint. Would that be true?
Yeah, I do all those things. I used to be a pretty active investigator for the state of Tennessee, and I'm not doing that with them now. I did recently partake in an investigative case in another state for a regulatory board where I would be their expert witness. But over the last many years, I've really enjoyed this because, again, I'm all about appraisers. I provide a service where I try to help appraisers that find themselves in trouble, try and find ways to get them out of trouble. And we've had a high level of success doing that. But appraisers have to remember, if you're supposed to have something in your report and it's not there, I can't magically make it appear for you in your report. I mean, it's either there or it isn't, right? So sometimes I can help and sometimes I can't. But yeah, I'm all about trying to help the appraiser. Absolutely.
So Bryan, when you're looking at an appraisal report, and I'm assuming when you do, you must also ask the appraiser, where's the support for your adjustment? I know that support is likely an opinion, or at least an opinion as it relates to an appraisal. But you asked the question, right?
Yeah, I mean, we all have opinions. Some are better than others, I suppose. But the key, the critical question is, what are you basing that opinion on, right? I mean, there are opinions that have support, and then there's opinions that have zero support, right? And so what USPAP requires is that you develop credible assignment results. Credible meaning believable. So you've got to have some kind of support for that opinion.
So when you're trying to help these appraisers, you have these conversations, and how do they respond?
Well, it's not uncommon when I ask the question, well, where'd you get that number? Or where'd you get this conclusion for your highest and best use? Or where'd you get that adjustment for an ADU when none of your comps have an ADU? They typically say, well, that's just my opinion. And then, of course, I'll say, well, based on what? And they'll, again, that's just my opinion. And if they really want to impress me, they try to say, I've been doing this 30 years, or I've been doing this 40 years. It's just my opinion. And what's really interesting, John, is when I say, I understand it's your opinion. My question is, what are you basing that opinion on? The answer I get more often than not is years of experience.
Years of experience. It's actually something that I read quite often in reports, or at least the communication log within an appraisal. But it's also shared verbally by appraisers to our team when they're called. Now, you obviously don't accept that. You must ask them again.
I do. I ask them again. Can you be a little bit more specific? And the answer is years of experience. And typically, I respond the second time by saying, never say that again.
It is those exact words that stuck out to me most. For those of you who have never seen Bryan speak on the subject, it's really impactful and powerful to see those words on display as you just did. I know, Bryan, that you're passionate about our profession. You certainly aren't discounting the years of experience, though, are you?
No, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because I probably just made a bunch of appraisers mad, and that's not my intent, and that's not why I agreed to do this video with you, right? Let me clarify this. If you're a practicing appraiser and you have years of experience, you've been doing this 20, 30, 40, 50 years, 10 years, however long you've been doing it, and you do your job, you analyze the actions of market participants in your market. You really do research. You do your job. You base your opinions on something. I tip my hat to that. Thank you for that great service you're providing to clients and in your effort to protect the public. That's exactly what you're supposed to do. So I tip my hat to those folks that have that amount of years of experience. What's frustrating for me, as well as I'm sure many clients, not just you, and the courts and regulatory authorities, what's very frustrating is when you ask an appraiser for support, and let's just face it, they don't have any, and they use this as a cop-out answer. Like, who are you to question me? I've been doing this for 40 years, or I've been doing this 30 years. I know what I'm doing. You shouldn't have the audacity to ask me what I'm basing it on. I'm basing it on, I've been doing it 30 years. That's not good enough. And the reason why is, just imagine that 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, you learned an improper technique. I mean, you learned how to do something the wrong way. And you've been doing it that way for 20 or 30 years. Wouldn't you just have years of experience doing something wrong? The answer is yes, you would. I want to read just a little quote out of the new edition of USPAP, the 2024 edition of USPAP, and it says, the appraisal profession is constantly reviewing and revising appraisal methods and techniques and devising new methods and techniques to meet new circumstances. For this reason, it is not sufficient for appraisers to simply maintain the skills and the knowledge they possessed when they became appraisers. Each appraiser must continuously improve his or her skills to remain proficient in real property appraisal. So we've got to constantly keep an open mind, constantly trying to learn new methods or new techniques, maybe refresh our memory in old techniques that we've gotten a little laxed on, right? So that's your responsibility. That's a requirement. That's not a suggestion or a recommendation or a guideline. That is a requirement of Standard Rule 1 in USPAP, your minimum standards.
Bryan, that is really helpful and meaningful. What I and the team here from our panel of appraisers, whom we appreciate very much as partners, is frustration though. Often what is expressed is that this is going to be hard, and really what you're asking me to do is complete a narrative appraisal report, and quite frankly, that's not what I signed up for. So I think for some of the appraisers, they're looking for answers on how to do it. And I try to remind them that I don't think they need to be overly verbose in their response. Maybe I'm wrong. But as previously mentioned, you're also a commercial appraiser and you have experience writing narrative reports. You also have experience completing form-driven reports for residential properties. So how would you respond or assist an appraiser in understanding what they should be providing in the commentary? Consider again the way the GSEs express it, and that is they want to see your reasoning and logic behind your adjustments.
So you have to imagine if you were an appraiser and you end up in court. And many are probably saying, well, I'm never going to court, so I don't have to worry about that. Well, guess what? If you get a subpoena, you're going to court, whether you want to be there or not. And you have to be ready to answer the hard questions. Where'd you get that adjustment for a 1-car versus a 2-car? That $5,000 adjustment's been that way for 40 years. It never changes, right? Or where did you get your adjustment for a 2-bathroom as opposed to a 1-bathroom? You know, that $2,000 adjustment. Are you kidding me? If anybody out there is making a $2,000 adjustment for a 1-bath versus a 2-bath, come on. Have you ever lived in a house with 1 bathroom? I'll give you 10 grand for a 2nd bath, right? I'm never going back to 1 bathroom. It doesn't meet the needs of typical market participants, right? I don't know what the adjustment is. It might be different in your market. It might be different based on the overall sale prices within a particular segment of the market, but you've got to do your research and analyze that. There are many techniques in order to figure out what that adjustment is. And, you know, we like to bracket. Bracketing's not always possible. I did one recently where we had an ADU and there were no comps anywhere with ADUs. So did the ADU contribute? Did it not contribute? You got to figure that out. And there's ways that you can do that. You know, a depreciated cost analysis. That's a recognized technique in appraisal literature. Income capitalization, market survey, interview direct primary market participants, interview secondary market participants. I have a case study in one of my classes. It's an income, Appraiser's Guide to the Income Approach. And we show you how to extract those adjustments. I've got appraising limited market properties, and I use that exact example. You got a house with an ADU. You have lots of other houses just like your subject, but none of them have an ADU. And during that course, I break down and show the appraiser 2 recognized techniques to help support that adjustment for an ADU. I'm going to be brutally honest here. The first time we did that, sent it into our client, guess what? We got pushback. Surprise. None of our comps had an ADU. I had ADU down on that bottom line and an adjustment across the board. And yes, they called me. But when I walked them through how we extracted that adjustment, they said, thank you very much, and moved on. They closed the loan. What we've started doing, if we run into that scenario, and I know we have at least twice in the last 6 months, same scenario, now we document within the report how we developed that opinion for that line item adjustment, since none of the comps had those ADUs. And guess what? We didn't get calls back on that. They took it based on our commentary within the report. So that's what I encourage appraisers to do. You know, learn something new, think outside of the box. Know that there are a lot of tools out there, Solomon, Datamaster, you know, there's tons of tools out there at your disposal and learning opportunities. You're never too old to learn.
So hold on, if I'm hearing you correctly, it's an obligation to provide your rationale for your adjustments to support your opinions per USPAP. And you're saying it's not just standard 1 in development, but in standard 2 reporting. I think, Bryan, it's also a scope of work rule, or at least it's stated in the scope of work.
You've got to have your support in your work file, no question about it. But if somebody calls for, hey, how'd you get this? You need to be able to explain that and communicate that. But certainly if you're called upon, hey, how'd you get that? Again, imagine if you were sitting in court. Imagine if you're sitting in front of your regulatory board and they want to know how you got that adjustment. I'll tell you right now, as a former investigator, kind of an investigator, and certainly as someone that helps appraisers defend their positions, right? Years of experience is not going to get you out of trouble in court or at a regulatory hearing. So have something. We can argue whether or not you had enough. We can argue whether or not I got a result using a different recognized technique. But as long as you have something that you can say, this is the recognized technique or method I use to support my opinion, then you've got something to hang your hat on.
All right. So when you were speaking, one thing that resonates for me is that you mentioned having the commentary in your report and walking your client through that commentary, showing the support for the adjustment without an ADU. I think, Bryan, for our team, including myself, once a file is escalated, we would much rather read through the report and the commentary and point the client to the commentary rather than pursue additional revisions by the appraiser. I think where the team and I struggle is when it's absent and that commentary includes my years of experience or it's my opinion and you just need to trust me. Listen, if we can't help the client understand the report, then we have no other choice but to go back to the appraiser asking for just that. Hey, Bryan, I want to thank you, and I appreciate your time and your feedback very much. I also want to thank you for what you do for the profession and giving back to the appraiser community as well. Again, much appreciated. Have an awesome day.
You bet. Thank you very much, John, for having me on, and hopefully appraisers can take away something, and let's all just sharpen our tools a little sharper and do our jobs to the best of our abilities.